Decisions made in Washington can affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Washington-Wise is an original podcast from Charles Schwab that unpacks the stories making news in Washington right now and how they may affect your finances and portfolio. Listen at schwab.com/WashingtonWise. Decisions made in Washington can affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Washington-Wise is an original podcast from Charles Schwab that unpacks the stories making news in Washington right now and how they may affect your finances and portfolio. Listen at schwab.com/WashingtonWise. On Sunday afternoon, when I got Talking Points Memo's Josh Marshall on the line, my question for him was simple. Do you think the government should be open right now?
I think no. I think there should have been some sort of fight over this, and probably the government would have started to shut down.
You think the government needed like a pause, kind of like a restart the computer situation?
Kind of. I guess so. I guess that's the way to put it.
I asked Josh this question because there's an alternative timeline of the last few days. A timeline in which the Democrats in the Senate took a hard vote and the federal government closed its doors. The Democrats would have been rejecting what's called a continuing resolution to keep the lights on in Washington.
To keep the government open, Donald Trump and the Republicans needed Democrats, even though the entire basis of his presidency for the last 6 weeks is, sucks to be you, and we can do anything we want, and you're out of power, and that's all there is to it. So there was this potential big turnaround.
The first sign this negotiation was not going as expected was when the House was able to jam their version of the CR through, despite having a caucus full of grouches and naysayers. In the Senate, though, this thing needed 60 votes. That meant that if the Democrats hung together, they should have been able to stop it.
And we are now just hours away from a possible government shutdown. The Senate is facing.
It turns out some very important Democrats did not want to hang together.
This is a live look at the Capitol, where Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says he will not block a Republican measure to fund the government beyond today. He says a shutdown would lead to even more cuts. But some House Democrats who had largely stood unified against Republicans are furious, suggesting some in their party have caved.
So for better or for worse, the government is open. But the inter-party squabble this incident revealed, that could last. It pitted institutionalists like Chuck Schumer in the Senate against a wide swath of legislators in the House, from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to Nancy Pelosi, to Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries.
This is by and large not an ideological fight within the Democratic Party.
Well, it's interesting. I've seen it characterized using different valences, and none of them I think are quite right. I've seen people talk about it as a generational fight. I think that's wrong. I've heard people talk about it as an ideological fight. I think that's wrong. I think it's a fight that's really about approach.
I think that's right. I think that's totally right.
Yeah, it's a fight about fighting. How hard do you want to fight?
I think that is exactly right. And this was Schumer's argument. A fight is too dangerous.
You do not sound like a Chuck Schumer fan at this point.
It's funny because my kind of position in all of these kinds of things is usually to be the person who comes in and tells the people who are really angry, it's a little more complicated than you thought. And there's this and that and the other, and there's the other thing and the third thing. And in this case, yeah, I think he blew it.
Today on the show, the story of how Democrats lost their leverage on Capitol Hill. I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around. This episode is brought to you by Spot and Tango. If you've got a dog, like I do, you probably know they will eat just about anything. And that's kind of the whole problem, right? They'll eat your socks. They'll steal the prime rib off the counter. They'll down that container of dried peaches you thought you hid away. Yes, Bonnie, I am talking about you. But as a dog owner, you want your dog to eat what's good for them, which is where a dog food company like Spot and Tango comes in. They use fresh, human-grade ingredients so your dog will crave what they actually need. My dog, Bonnie, she's on a diet, so I was especially psyched to feed her something new. Spot and Tango is sending over some of their unkibble, which is like kibble, but it's made from gently cooked, freeze-dried ingredients, which means the joy of people food, along with the convenience of the bagged stuff. And unlike what you'd find at the pet store, unkibble is personalized to your dog. You just send in your dog's age, breed, weight, activity level, and they send you the good stuff. Spot and Tango is offering an exclusive deal to our listeners. For a limited time, go to spotandtango.com/whatnext and use code WhatNext to get 50% off your first order. That's spotandtango.com/whatnext, code WhatNext to get 50% off your first order. spotandtango.com/whatnext, code WhatNext. This episode is brought to you by Quince. Who does not love the good things in life? Everyone enjoys a little bit of luxury, but it's not always affordable, except when it comes to Quince. Quince is the go-to for luxury essentials at affordable prices. I know this because they sent me a couple of their items to try out, including a cashmere sweater that was only $50. It was great. I wear it everywhere. And Quince offers a range of items just like this, high-quality stuff with prices within reach. There's washable silk tops and dresses, organic cotton sweaters, 14-karat gold jewelry. It's all there. And all Quince items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. By partnering directly with top factories, Quince cuts out the middleman, passes on the savings to you. So, if you want a little luxury, give yourself the luxury you deserve with Quince. Go to quince.com/whatnext for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That is QUINCE.com/whatnext to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/whatnext. Tell me what happened in the House where this legislation began. We have this GOP-crafted bill. Democrats weren't consulted on any of it, basically?
Yeah, by design, they weren't consulted on it. There was some initial negotiation, and Democrats basically said, look, if we're going to pass this kind of mini stopgap budget bill, we need some assurances that Donald Trump is not going to turn around and just cut the budget after we pass it. Mike Johnson realized that was a total non-starter for Donald Trump to put any limitations on his power. So they just said, fine, we're just going to do this ourselves. And they included a number of additional things that under normal circumstances would be poison pills for the Democrats.
Is this stuff like slashing Washington, D.C.'s budget, things like that?
Slashing Washington, D.C.'s budget. It added a lot of additional spending for things Republicans support, cuts for things that Democrats support. There's sort of too many things to get into. But just as one example, everybody knows that Donald Trump is sort of imposing tariffs, unimposing them, imposing bigger ones the next day. We've been doing this for the last month with these tariffs. Now, some people, because of that, get the idea that tariffs are like a pardon, one of these things that's just like in the president's power. The Constitution gives him that power. Tariffs are not like that at all. The president has no power over tariffs whatsoever. But there is standing legislation that has been in place for decades that basically gives presidents this power. And so in this bill, they put in additional language that takes away some of Congress's very, very limited power under current law to say no to some of these tariffs.
So this is not what's called usually a clean CR, where it's just we're saying like, gavel, gavel. We're going to do what we said we'd do for a few months and come back and talk about it later. This is, let's give a lot more power to Donald Trump, but say that we're just doing it as a funding bill. Is that a fair assessment?
Exactly. I mean,
so it's insulting if you're a Democrat.
it is insulting. It's nowhere near clean. A clean CR, a little code word they use for these kind of bills, is one sentence, continue on. And this was like 100-page bill. So yeah, it was not even close to being just a continuation.
So Hakeem Jeffries, the leader of the Democrats in the House, he got a lot of his Democrats to vote against this bill, including Democrats in swing districts who were pretty vulnerable.
Yes.
It goes along to the Senate. Was he expecting the Senate would stand up here? Was there an agreement here?
How it is being presented now, how a lot of House Democrats are presenting this is kind of what you're getting at, that they went out on a limb and then the Senate didn't back them up. I think that's part of the story. I'm not sure it's completely the story.
There was an expectation, but maybe not an agreement.
I think they were all kind of caught off guard by being here. And I think the House decided to hold the line. And then it's going to go to the Senate and kind of we'll see what happens there.
The House, notably a much more vulnerable constituency of lawmakers. These are people who are up for election every 2 years, unlike the Senate.
Yeah, precisely. And I think that, the key thing here is neither House nor Senate Democrats had laid the groundwork if this was going to be a fight. And that was something that a lot of people were telling them to do. Like basically a month ago, you need to be saying, you're doing all this illegal cutting. You think you can do it now, but we say no. And look at that deadline coming up. We're doing it for X, Y, and Z. But they didn't do that. And they had a sort of explanation why they didn't do that, but they didn't. And the Senate Democrats were especially caught flat-footed because they were figuring it wouldn't get out of the House.
I'm just chuckling to myself because I'm like, y'all, you have a job, like one job.
Exactly. So it's one of these things where I think it is true that they didn't think it was going to get out of the House. And there were some good reasons to think it wasn't going to get out of the House.
But you got to be prepared when the ball comes to you, my friend.
It is insane that they hadn't seriously thought through what they would do if it did get through the House.
So this legislation reaches the Senate. We have this weird week where you have first Schumer being like, we're not going to do it. And then it's clear, maybe we're going to do this, help the Republicans out here. And it all comes to a head on Friday, which is when this thing has to get done or the government will shut down.
Yep.
What surprised you as these votes started to come in? Because I think people suspected that this CR was going to get passed by the Senate. But then we had people like Hawaii's Brian Schatz voting for this CR. And that surprised me because he's been outspoken about we are going to use these spending fights as points of leverage because the Democrats need to show that we're fighting right now. And that's not what he did here.
Yeah, he is sort of the biggest mystery. I was greatly surprised by that for exactly the reasons you're saying. And I still have not seen a clear explanation of why he did it. He's a fairly progressive senator for the Senate. He spends time in the online political spaces. He sort of speaks that language and stuff. A number of the senators who voted yes were either people who are retiring, are people who are extremely close to the leadership. Gillibrand, obviously, is the junior senator from New York. So she's kind of always going to take Chuck Schumer's lead. Basically, almost everybody who voted yes has a similar kind of profile in the Senate. And Schatz was the big exception.
Can we take seriously the arguments Democrats were making against shutting down the government and for this continuing resolution? Because Chuck Schumer did try to explain his logic here. He mostly seemed to be saying, if we shut the government down, Donald Trump is going to have power to control spending for whatever money is left. He could just start shutting all sorts of things down willy-nilly, which would be incredibly damaging. Is that the main argument here?
I think there's two arguments. One is that you shut the government down and the Democrats will get the blame for it, a political argument. And the other is that as bad as things are right now, you're just sort of like handing him a blank check. I think those two arguments were real arguments. I don't think they were good arguments, but there's an additional factor, which is kind of what is the argument that we are actually going to get something from it. And if you take each of those premises, like we could be damaged politically, the government could be damaged more than it already is being damaged, and there's no way we can actually gain anything. Well, again, if you buy those premises, then that's not a bad argument altogether. I don't think that the people who wanted to do this were lying. I think that characterologically, they weren't in a mood to fight.
Yeah, because I think you could take the same set of facts and you could make a different argument, which is an argument I'd call an accelerationist argument. Essentially that, yes, Trump and Elon Musk may do worse things during this shutdown, but that will make clear to a broader swath of American people exactly the project that they are trying to complete here sooner, and that will make it easier for us to argue against them and control them more quickly. And now you're playing with fire. There's a reason it's called an accelerationist argument, right? But I think it's a real argument that you need to reckon with.
Yeah, and I think it is actually the correct argument. I wouldn't put it in precisely accelerationist terms. How I would put it is this, that in terms of the idea that they can just do anything they want and they can do even more, it's not entirely clear that is actually factually true, in as much as that they're kind of already doing everything they want. But public opinion remains a backstop to that. And one of my kind of global arguments would be that the people who did not want to fight about this are very over literal about things.
What do you mean about that?
I think that much of national politics is not about specific events or policies. It's about a series of contests of performative power. It's sort of like, think about it, if anybody kind of is familiar with opera, there's the libretto and there's the score, right? The libretto is the policy stuff and these little ins and outs about culture and stuff. And the libretto, I'm going to bum out libretto fans. The libretto is not really what opera is about. It's the score. That is the emotional content and the real driving force of opera. And the score in this case is, again, these performative displays of power. And if you have situations where the underdogs, let's call them that, if the one opening they have to fight, they don't fight, that shapes everybody's perceptions of everything.
Like whether they even can fight.
Yes, exactly.
So your job is to tell people they can fight. They have a voice if you're a politician, is what you're saying.
And that your fighting can shape outcomes, even if on the details it's hard to see.
And it's notable here that the head of the American Federation of Government Employees, the largest federal employee union, did write a letter to senators asking them for a shutdown.
Yeah, which is basically slitting their own throats, sort of.
Yeah. I mean, their members would be the most affected because they could be furloughed. There's no guarantee they get those jobs back. And they were saying what we're going through right now is so painful. We need a cold stop. And senators seem to disregard that, which I really was surprised by.
Yeah, that was a very big moment because Democrats don't want to shut the government down because they're the party of government, and Republicans generally don't care. And it's federal workers who are going to take the brunt. So when you have the federal workers come out and say that, it's a very big deal. It's one of these situations where if you are going to be fired, you say, let's fight right now. They were the ones who had skin in the game, much more than the senators do. But
Yeah.
it didn't sway any opinions.
You know, one thing I do want us to talk about is the fact that Chuck Schumer's getting a lot of blame here. And, rightly so. He was leading this charge to the extent that was a charge.
Low energy charge.
Exactly. Some other journalists have noted that really any senator could have slowed down this continuing resolution, right? They could have denied unanimous consent on the resolution, pushed the debate a few days, basically allowed discontent to fester a little bit, had some more time to talk?
No, it's absolutely true, and they did not do it.
Why didn't any of them? Like, Bernie, where you at?
Yeah. And just for clarity, literally a single senator could have done it. Any single senator could have done it, and they did not do it. And I don't know. I think that people are right to have some suspicion that the people who said they were going to vote no on cloture maybe weren't quite as eager as they were making out.
After the break, now that Republicans have what they want, can Democrats do anything?
When you check out at the pharmacy, you see the journey from idea to medicine, thanks to our intellectual property system, or IP for short. IP safeguards inventions, like a new way to prevent seizures or lower cholesterol. And IP supports competition from other brands, then lower cost generics, which are 90% of prescriptions filled in the US. Innovation, competition, lower costs, thanks to IP. Learn more at phrma.org/IP-workswonders.
Your data is like gold to hackers. They're selling your passwords, bank details, and private messages. McAfee helps stop them. Secure VPN keeps your online activity private. AI-powered text scam detector spots phishing attempts instantly. And with award-winning antivirus, you get top-tier hacker protection. Plus, you'll get up to $2 million in identity theft coverage, all for just $39.99 for your first year. Visit McAfee.com. Cancel anytime. Terms apply.
Are your ulcerative colitis symptoms proving difficult to manage? Tremfya guselkumab can help you manage the cycle of UC symptoms. At 1 year, many patients taking Tremfya achieved clinical remission, and some patients also achieved endoscopic remission. Individual results may vary. Tremfya is a prescription medicine used to treat adults with moderately to severely active ulcerative colitis. Serious allergic reactions and increased risk of infections may occur. Before treatment, your doctor should check you for infections and TB. Tell your doctor if you have an infection, flu-like symptoms, or if you need a vaccine. Ask your doctor if Tremfya can help you manage the cycle of UC symptoms. Call 1-800-526-7736 to learn more, or visit tremfyaradio.com.
So for Democrats, where are we now? Like, we had this funny press appearance by Hakeem Jeffries last week where he was asked about Chuck Schumer and his moves here and whether he should still be the leader in the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very Washington moment because all he said was next question. But Politico was like, he chose violence. In D.C., that's seen as like
a very dramatic language they use.
Right?
Yeah, I will say it's a big deal when any party leader says that about any other party leader. It's an additional thing that people in the House don't tell the Senate how to pick their leaders and vice versa.
Because they're the JV squad.
But that was a pretty big moment, and my impression at the end of last week is that Schumer and the people around him did not grasp the scale of the fissure that he was opening up in the Democratic Party
until he opened it up.
I'm not even 100% sure he quite grasps it now. I had, I wrote something, and I mean, it's a kind of a ghastly metaphor, but people remember that movie Chernobyl, where you have these things if certain people have already been irradiated and they're dead. They just don't know it yet, right? Because it takes a couple days for severe radiation poisoning to get you.
Yeah. And
I kind of see Chuck Schumer as a bit like that. I think that he has
dead man walking.
Yeah, I kind of think he is. We're going to see how this shakes out.
Yeah, I've heard this online chatter about senators putting themselves at risk of a Tea Party-like movement, and so many people are openly discussing AOC primarying Chuck Schumer. And I am curious to talk to you about that, because part of the problem I see with that is that the Tea Party was about the House first, because the House moves fast. The Senate's just not vulnerable in that way. Senators get 6-year terms. Chuck is not up again until 2028. And so I'm curious about that analogy, how workable you think it is, and whether you think there's a better one in history that explains where the Democrats are in this moment.
I think it's an okay analogy. It is true that it's not a great model for disciplining the Senate, for lack of a better word. Chuck Schumer is extremely entrenched in New York State. I think even an AOC would be challenged to defeat him in a primary. And as you say, it's 4 years from now.
A lot can happen in 4 years.
The one who actually would be quite vulnerable is Kirsten Gillibrand, but she's not up for 6 years. Having said this, I do think there is a real chance that you are going to see Democrats, at least Democrats in fairly blue states, face primaries. And look, there will be other standoffs in the House. This one vote will not be the only vote. And the challenge there for Democrats is that if you are going to have a challenging general election, if you come into that having come out of a very bruising primary, you tend to lose those races. And Democrats are obviously looking forward to 2026 as their one chance to kind of
course correct.
Yeah, to change things. So a lot of complicated decisions coming up for Democrats. They are shorn of almost all power, and they are facing someone who is, in political terms and sometimes in literal terms, brutal and destructive. And that's just a tough place to be.
So here's where we are now. Government's open. And over this weekend, we've seen this pattern continue where from Friday to Sunday, there's all of a sudden a burst of illegal norm-busting behavior, which seems to be how things are going. Like you see Voice of America, which has funded journalism internationally, is in the crosshairs. We're seeing these irregular and seemingly political deportations. I think that the Chuck Schumers of the world might say, this is the sort of stuff that could have gotten much worse over a shutdown. I'm not sure I agree with that. But do you?
I think what Democrats faced here is that there are both options were very bad and they have a lot of unknowns. And that's scary. That is a scary situation. And yes, maybe it could have. But I think the bigger reality is that Trump is very clearly facing no constraints under the current situation. And it could have gotten worse. But when someone is facing no constraints, by definition, it's hard for it to get a lot worse because there's nothing worse than no constraints, right? Think about it this way. If you're losing a game of chess, right, you might say, I'm just going to take the board and throw it up in the air, right? Because I'm losing and I'm going to shake everything up and then we'll see. And that's kind of, I think, what they were facing. They have no power right now. Trump has no constraint on him whatsoever. And you look at that and you say, we're going to take some real risks because it actually can't be much worse than the situation that we're currently in. And this may open up some new possibilities. We're going to take some real risks to have the chance of those new possibilities.
So the Democrats still seem committed to playing the game by the rules they've known for a few decades now.
And the rules that their opponents very explicitly say do not bind them.
Josh, I'm really grateful for your time and your analysis. You really helped me out. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Josh Marshall is the editor-in-chief of Talking Points Memo. And that's our show. What Next is produced by Paige Osburn, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Anna Phillips, Madeline Ducharme, and Ethan Oberman. Ben Richmond is the senior director of podcast operations here at Slate. Hillary Fry is our editor-in-chief. And I'm Mary Harris. You can go track me down on Blue Sky. I'm at Mary Harris. Thanks for listening. Catch you back here next time.